Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's media briefing. My name is Lisa Lord. I'm the Public Affairs Officer in the Public Affairs Department. The topic is education, and therefore we're joined by the Minister of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Honourable Santia Bradshaw, as well as the Acting Chief Education Officer, Ms. Joy Adamson, and Dr. Roderick Rudder, the Deputy Chief Education Officer. Conscious of the time and the fact that we don't want to run into news time, we will ask members of the media to keep their questions as direct as possible, and we will begin with a statement from Minister Bradshaw.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Good evening, fellow Barbadians. Good evening to members of the media. It is just over 1 year since the first COVID-19 case in Barbados. It is also just over 1 year since we closed schools to face-to-face instruction in this country, and we were all thrust into the online environment. It has not been easy for any of us, whether in the Ministry of Education, parents, educators, ancillary staff, general public, students. Term one for us, we decided that we would have a blended approach to learning and teaching. Our teachers had to equip themselves quickly to be able to make the transition, and our students also had to make the transition to being able to work in an online environment. It has not been easy. And I say that simply to reinforce that none of us have expected what has unfolded over the course of the last year, and none of us have been prepared for any of the eventualities that have presented itself over the course of the last year. In the first term, there were over 60% of our students who were able to engage in full face-to-face. And why? Because we had a number of schools, because of the size of the plant, that we were able to accommodate those students. But the remainder of the students did not have the opportunity to be able to engage in full face-to-face instruction with their teachers. For term two, just as we were about to return to the classroom environment in a phased way, again, we had consultations with all stakeholders. We were thrust into a situation where we had a spike in cases in this country. And of course, in response to that, we determined that it was best to allow our students to remain at home. We've also been grappling with, as you know, MESI, which is the cases where we've discovered within children as well. And that has had the Ministry of Education and certainly the Ministry of Health and Wellness having to reconsider its approaches in terms of students returning to the classroom environment. I want to first of all say thank you this evening to the principals, to the teachers, to the parents, and to the ancillary staff across all educational institutions for their commitment and dedication to helping our students through this most difficult time. I know that the transition has not been easy, but many of you rose to the occasion to ensure that our children were able to attend classes in the online environment. I witnessed teachers over the course of the last few months engage in online courses through the Urdeston Teachers Training College, equipping themselves with the necessary tools to be able to make the transition. And I want to say publicly thank you to you for rising to the occasion. I also want to thank the corporate entities across Barbados and individuals who also stepped up to the plate to make sure that students who did not have devices were provided with those devices. And it wasn't just in the early stages of the pandemic. They continue to do so and continue to do so up to today. And I thank you for being your brother's keeper. While we become consumed by all of the negative feedback about this pandemic and the effects on education, we talk about the loss of face-to-face time, the stress on parents to cope, issues of cyberbullying, the lack of devices, and the general effect on the well-being of teachers and students. I believe that this entire experience has also laid bare a number of the inequalities which exist in the educational system. It has also made us pay attention to our children in a completely different way than we did before. We were able, through the online environment, to get into the homes of children, to see what many of the children who are considered deviant and disruptive in the school environment, what is actually happening in their home environment. And it has made all of us, I believe, acutely aware that we cannot ignore some of the signs and the things that that present to us as disruptive, but really sometimes are the cries of children calling out for help. This period has also forced us to appreciate our various stakeholders in education. Our stakeholders are our parents, it's our teachers, it's our unions, it's the educators within the Ministry of Education, and most importantly, it is our students. And we now understand and appreciate better the role that many of them play. As I joined the virtual classrooms, it was clear to me that when I listened to parents and grandparents in the background of the classroom environment, speaking about how difficult they realized that the classrooms must be face-to-face, it became clear that there was a greater appreciation for what teachers are doing in this country on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, over the course of the past few weeks, I've had to determine not whether if to go back to the classroom environment face-to-face, but rather when to go back to school. And I think all of you are well aware that across the world, attempts are being made to try to get children back into the classroom environment because the loss of instructional time to students is so grave that it can actually reverse a lot of the inroads that we have made in education. Barbados is no different. My colleagues in the region are also facing the same issues. Many of them have been having the same discussions that we've been having here, and many of them have also been meeting similar resistance to being able to go back into the environment of school in a face-to-face way. But one of the things that we've realized collectively is that we have to learn to balance risk. We have to learn to manage risk. And I want to tell this country that it has not been easy to balance the risk of the safety of our teachers or our students or our educators in returning to the classroom environment. We've had to weigh the concerns of all of the stakeholders. And I've spent many hours, many sleepless nights, battling with various persons, various interest groups, listening to people, trying to understand the different perspectives, trying to understand the fears, because these fears are real, the anxieties. People don't understand fully what it is that is transpiring. They're stressed out. And I've had to listen to various stakeholders to be able to get a better sense of what to do in order to return our children safely to the classroom environment. We've solicited views from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. I've said from the outset of this pandemic that it is important that we listen to the science, that we are guided by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and we continue to do so. We've had the opportunity to speak to ministries such as the Ministry of Public Transport and Works, because one of the major issues that has confronted us in returning students to the classroom has obviously been the issue of returning on the public transportation system and making sure that our students are obviously wearing masks when they traverse the to and fro of their homes and going to the school environment. We've had to have discussions at the level of the COVID subcommittee, which has, as you know, has been managing the affairs of this entire pandemic over the course of the last year. I've also had the opportunity in this last term to set up an oversight and monitoring committee within the Ministry of Education, which we didn't have in the first term, because again, it was new to us, but we decided that we needed to get into the virtual environment because our education officers could not go into the physical plant. And we wanted to understand better not only what the teachers were dealing with, but also what our students were dealing with, and also to make recommendations and suggestions to improve the online environment. And from those discussions, I can tell you that we've obviously been able to now realize that we have some serious challenges in the online environment. We've met with parents and we've met with guardians. Many people have stopped me, they've called, they've messaged, they've reached out and said simply they want to get the children back to school. Many of the parents have reached out and said they appreciate and they understand, you know, the dangers, but they also appreciate that the children are not focusing their attention in the online environment. And therefore it is important that we find a way to be able to get them back into the classroom. I have met with the unions. We have had long and lengthy discussions about these issues. We perhaps sometimes don't always see eye to eye on everything, but I think for the most part there's a genuine interest and concern to be able to find a way to do what we have to do safely in the interest of our children and in the interest of our teachers. I have also taken the opportunity not only to listen to the discussions from the unions, but also to speak to teachers directly. I have WhatsApp messages coming from teachers daily. I have, you know, teachers reaching out through the Chief Education Officer. Many of them are expressing what they are seeing unfolding in front of us in relation to our children. Many of them have fallen online. You have children logging on at times. They have some have the devices. They are logging on, but in many cases, they're then not engaging with the teachers. And a lot obviously is going on at home. Many of the teachers have alerted me to the fact as well that many of them are obviously missing the school meal service at the school because parents have been laid off from work. And therefore, it has made the environment extremely difficult, not only for teachers to teach, but also for children to be able to learn in the environments at home. And I don't think it goes without saying that many of the environments at home are often not conducive to online learning. And it is regrettable, but I know that we have tried our best to accommodate students wherever we can. But in this situation, it has been difficult, obviously, to change the circumstances because of our inability to bring the students back to the classroom environment. I've also had the opportunity to talk to many students, and I want to again say thank you to the students of this country who have been brave enough to write to me. I know that coming out of our leadership, the leadership badges, there were many of you who took the opportunity that was given by the Prime Minister of this country and certainly by the Ministry of Education to be able to reach out because you felt that you now had a voice. And I really appreciate all of the messages that have been coming in to indicate how you have been coping in this school, in the online environment, and your desire to find a way to be able to return to the classroom environment as well. This afternoon, I met with the Cabinet of Barbados after engaging in these lengthy discussions over the course of the past few weeks. And I want to say thank you to all of the persons who have been honest and also candid in the course of the discussions and have given us a number of perspectives from which we have now come to some solid determinations as it relates to Term 3. I acknowledge that there are fears, there are very real fears about the unknown. But the one thing that I also know is that we cannot allow fear to paralyze us. We have started the process of getting this country back to work. We have seen various levels of employees going back onto the front line. We've seen persons trying to get back after 1 year of experiencing this pandemic, getting back into the workplace. Indeed, our healthcare workers have been on the front line and doing an exceptional job to keep us safe. They perhaps are at greatest risk every single day as they deal with whether it's sick parents, sick children, the elderly population. They are on the front line. We also have seen our cashiers going back into the work environment to make sure that as we go about our daily business to go to the supermarkets, that there are persons there to be able to serve us. And as I said to the unions yesterday, I don't know that there's anything more dangerous than taking money and not knowing in some cases where the money whose hands the money has been handled by. It is not to say that the healthcare workers who are nurses and doctors are not on the front line and they're not equally at risk, but it is to say that all of these persons have understood that if they don't get Barbados back working, that all of us will suffer in the long term. And with tourism the way it is at this point in time, it is clear that we all have to do our part to be able to get this economy back moving again. I like to use the analogy that, we all prepare for the hurricane season. We know that a disaster could await us at any point in time, but we don't do nothing. Even from last year, we were all preparing in the event that we were in the unfortunate situation that there was a hurricane that was awaiting us. Therefore, Barbadians, I believe that this is a lesson for us all, that in everything we must do, we must also prepare. We must analyze the risk, and we must take the necessary precautions and preventative measures to minimize the risk to us. What do you do most times when a hurricane is coming? You make sure you get your supplies. You make sure that you do any necessary repairs to the house. And therefore, in our determination as to whether we return to the classroom environment or not, the consideration simply has been one of minimizing the risk and ensuring the safety of both our teachers and our students as we prepare to return to the classroom environment. Barbados has to get back on track. And I know that there are some who say that, teachers don't want to return to school. It has been my experience over the last few weeks that they may be in the minority. And it is not to say that the opinions of some don't matter. It is simply to say that sometimes it may not be the opinion of all. I've had discussions with the private institutions, for instance. Those institutions have indicated that they're all ready and rearing to go back to school. And I would hate to see a day in this country where we have a divide amongst private and public schools in the determination of whether we return into the classroom environment. I believe that they have understood that getting children back into the classroom is equally important to them as making sure that teachers are safe. And I have every confidence that our public school teachers will also feel the same way, as has been expressed to me on several occasions, that we just need to get our students back into school and to do so in as safe a manner as is possible. There was a recent study that was done by UNICEF which indicated that one of the things that placed Barbados head and shoulders above all other Caribbean territories was the fact that from the early stages of this pandemic, we were able to place safety monitors within our schools. And those school monitors, thankfully, were able to assist the teachers in the school environment and the principals in ensuring that our students sanitized their hands, that they kept the physical distancing, and of course, that they were wearing their masks as much as possible. We understand the fears and we understand the concerns, but I want to remind Barbadians that we have also tried to minimize the risk to our general population. It is why we said from the early stages that in relation to the vaccination, that after we determined that we would have vaccinations for the frontline workers, that we were going next to teachers. But we expanded it beyond teachers and we went to ancillary staff, our principals, our administrators, Ministry of Education officials, the safety monitors. We have expanded this to every single person who will interact in the school environment with our children. And we have done so simply because we are focused on minimizing risk and getting this economy and getting this country also back to working again. As of today, we have over 1,500 teachers that have been vaccinated. I believe there's another 800 that are due for vaccination tomorrow. We are pretty much over our halfway point of getting those teachers vaccinated. I believe that over the course of the next few days and certainly next week, we will see a greater uptake in the number of persons vaccinated. There are some who say we shouldn't go back to school until after the second vaccination, some 2 weeks after. And I've simply responded as follows. I've simply said, it is always about minimizing our risk. We know that the first dose of this vaccine affords us a certain level of protection. We also know that if we were to catch COVID after the first vaccination, it would not be as severe as if we did not have the vaccination. We also know that when you get the second vaccination, it is supposed to offer you even more protection. It doesn't guarantee you that you will never get COVID, but what it does is it minimizes the risk. I've had my vaccine, and I think most of you know my situation in terms of my own medical issues a year ago. And I did so because I understood that I had to lead by example, as have all of my colleagues. We are back on the job. I left cabinet just a short while ago, and we are all back on the front line and trying to get this country going again. It therefore means that we need to ensure that our schools are equally on board in ensuring that our children are also going back to school. And so the time for reopening of schools has now come. I therefore want to indicate to the country that effective on the 19th of April, all teachers and ancillary staff are required to return in person to their respective schools. School will therefore start for all students on Tuesday, the 20th of April. And when I say all students, I will break down the categories of students who will be identified for the first day of school. Those students who must report on Tuesday, the 20th of April, will be all Class 3 and Class 4 primary school students, as well as all 5th and 6th form students. And why? We've determined that the priority for this return to school, this phase return to school, has to be the students who are preparing for examinations. It doesn't mean that the other students don't matter, and I'll come to them in a minute. But it is important that we recognize, especially in relation to students who are preparing for the common entrance, that there are already high levels of anxiety that these children face, and we all know what I'm referring to. It's almost as though the exam determines a student's life, because we are all accustomed to hearing that your school determines what you will be. But the reality is it doesn't. And what has to now be more important than ever is that we have to pause and to recognize that these students need to get back into a face-to-face environment so that our teachers are in a position to be able to assess exactly where they are in terms of the loss of instructional time in the classroom. We can't do it over the virtual environment. We have to do it by being able to see where they are at socially, where they're at emotionally, where they are at psychologically as well. Because many of them have lost, the parents have lost their jobs. Many of them have perhaps not even been able to get a nutritious meal over the course of the last year. And therefore, it is important, I believe, that we have to first allow them to return to the classroom environment to be able to allow our teachers to properly assess where these students are. Similarly, we said that the students at the secondary schools, the fifth and sixth form students at this stage will also return face-to-face, primarily because they too are preparing for their exams, and we believe that they must have the opportunity to have that face-to-face time as they prepare. I think most of you also know that the opportunity is there for those examinations at the secondary level for students to be able to defer in the event that students feel that they are not ready for the particular examination. And that is something that we gave a lot of thought to, because we recognize that there are some students who will simply not be ready, and we do not want to penalize them by forcing them to do an exam if they are not prepared. With respect to all other students, the position that we have taken is that they will come back to school in a phased approach. We want to ensure that there is still some face-to-face time for all other students, and the intention is that they will be able to come in at least 3 days on, 2 days off, and they will be doing the 2 days in the online environment to be able to ensure that they still continue their classes. Let me just say here as well that it is important that we recognize that where we are today, we were not 4 weeks ago. And where we might be in 4 weeks is not where we are today. I say that simply to remind you that the dynamics of this situation may very well change, as they did on the last occasion. And if for any reason our numbers improve and the positivity rates are better, it is our hope in the Ministry of Education, and certainly the Cabinet of Barbados, that we're able to integrate more students into the classroom environment for Term 3. Nursery school students and students enrolled in the nursery units at primary schools will also be allowed to return face-to-face from Tuesday, the 20th of April, using a phased approach. And the schedule of those classes will be determined by the ministry in consultation with the respective principals at those schools. We've been working closely with the COVID monitoring unit to be able to look at the spacing to make sure that we have all of the requisite materials in place, all of the sanitizing equipment, and therefore they have been assisting us with a specially dedicated team to education to guide us through this process and to guide the respective institutions through this process. Arising out of one of the major concerns that was raised in relation to the time of day, how long should children be at school, we've also felt that we needed to reduce the time spent at school, because we're mindful that a lot of these kids are wearing masks for the entire day. And I think, just like many of you, it can become a little tedious having to wear a mask an entire day, especially if you suffer with some kind of respiratory illness, asthma. It is difficult to wear it for 6 hours or so. And we believe that while we have mask breaks provided, we also want to be able to give the students a break, and also our teachers. And therefore, we have proposed that we reopen the schools from 9 a.m. until 2 p.m. School monitors, which have featured heavily in relation to the first term and which have been very effective, as I stated earlier, will also return to the school environment at both the nursery, the special needs institutions, and certainly all of our primary schools on Monday, the 19th of April. We have taken the view, after much consultation with our Ministry of Health and Wellness, persons within the psychiatric hospital, a number of the counselors who have spoken to both students as well as to parents and certainly to teachers over the course of this last year, that what is first important to us is to be able to assess and to see where our students are. And so as we return to the classroom environment, it is our intention that we will establish a mental health committee, a mental health and wellness committee, I should say, to be able to look at how our children have fared during this period, as well as our teachers. And it is not something that we want to do just as a one-off. We want to ensure that we can follow the progress of these students and to provide the necessary support to them as well as to their teachers over the course of at least the next 3 years, because it has not been easy for any of us or any of them to be able to cope with this particular transition. Will we get it right? And will there be challenges? I want to state here tonight that there will always be challenges. We haven't gotten everything right in this pandemic. But the one thing that I believe that all Barbadians have been united on is the effort to make sure that we try to do the best that we can for this country. And in so doing, I believe that if we put our heads together, as we have done on previous occasions in relation to our protocols, we weighed in with we had all of the international organizations, PAHO, UNICEF, all of them weighing in to assist us with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, our unions, our various stakeholders. We were able to come up with protocols that for the most part, they worked. Were there things that we could do differently? Yes, there are. And we intend to do those things that have been highlighted that we need to tighten. So do we need to make sure that the schools have adequate supplies and make sure that we ensure that the places are cleaned and sanitized regularly? Yes, we have to. And we have to ensure that it is an all-of-school approach. It is the Ministry of Education that has a responsibility. It is the principals and leaders of the institutions. It is the ancillary staff. It is our teachers. It is our parents. And it is also our students that have to make sure that being safe in the school environment works for everyone. It is not any one person's responsibility alone, and I want people to understand that. In order for all of us to be safe, we say we have to wear a mask. We say that we wear the mask in order to protect ourselves, but we also say we wear the mask in order to protect others. It is no different. If the school environment is not clean and tidy, then it is all of our responsibility to make sure that we point the fingers where the fingers need to be pointed, but you have to make sure that the fingers are not pointing back at us as well. And therefore, I believe that we can do this effort seamlessly. We can do it safely. I know that teachers are not opposed to going back into school, and I want to make that abundantly clear in case others misinterpret or give the impression that teachers do not want to go back to school. Teachers want to go, but they want the assurance that they can do so safely. And tonight I simply want to say to all of you in Barbados that we will ensure that we can get our students back to the school environment safely. For those who say, what happens if we have a couple cases within the schools? We have proven before that we don't waste time. We know when to apply the brakes, and we know when to apply the gas, as the Prime Minister would say. We know that when we saw the situation at one of our secondary schools where we had 2 cases of COVID, and we shut down the classes to be able to do our necessary contact tracing, and we put the protocols in place to make sure that our students were safe and our teachers were safe. So we understand that we have a responsibility to protect those who are on the front line, and we will continue to do so. And I'm happy that we've been able to have the support of the Ministry of Health and Wellness at all these meetings recently to be able to guide us as to how to strengthen the protocols that we must now continue to put in place across the various schools. I want to make the point that every category of worker has come to grips with the fact that we have to keep this country going. The workers at the Sanitation Service Authority could have decided that they ain't picking up no garbage, but we got over that hurdle, and they were able to do so safely, and our garbage is now being collected. Similarly, the healthcare workers could have said they're not driving a stroke, but they didn't say that. They worked through this entire pandemic, putting themselves at great risk to make sure that all of us have been safe. The taxi operators have done the same thing. They transport people on a daily basis to and fro, even tourists coming into the country. But they do so appreciating the protocols, enforcing the protocols, and making sure that when the person gets into the vehicle, that they take the necessary steps to protect themselves and to protect others as well. Schools are no different. And therefore, we have a responsibility, given the loss of time in the classroom, of face-to-face instructional time, the difficulties that all have encountered over the course of the past year in relation to making the transition to the online environment. And let me just say, no matter how many courses and classes we have done to help our teachers, they have been thrust into this environment in a way that we could never have imagined. If we had the time to plan, we could perhaps have perfected this. But we didn't have the time. COVID didn't give us the time. And therefore, we've given support to them, but we also have to understand how difficult it is for many of them with their own children at home, trying to be able to cope in the environment and also teach our various students across the system. These are the realities of what the online environment has held for our students and for our teachers. And I hope that as we get ready to reopen the schools, that everyone can appreciate how difficult, as I said before, these decisions are to make. But we believe that we are now at the point in Barbados where we've had over 62,000 people vaccinated. We're moving towards herd immunity. We continue to receive the vaccinations to be able to ensure that our population is safe. We have vaccinated more people in this part of the Western Hemisphere than any other Caribbean territory. I want you to understand that we will leave no stone unturned in making sure that our people are safe, that our elderly population is protected, and certainly that our most vulnerable are protected. Therefore, as we approach this new school term, I want us to do so fully appreciative of the fact that we all have a part to play. Parents, to you, I want to simply say you have a responsibility to make sure that your children are wearing the mask when they leave home, to make sure that they have the mask in their bag, and to reinforce the necessary messages when they go to school so that we don't have to repeat this again. We will have the vigilance of our COVID monitoring unit on the ground. We will have the island constables on the ground to make sure that our students are wearing the masks. And we will do what we have to do to ensure that we protect all and sundry across this country. But what we cannot do is lose any more instructional time in the classroom and to continue to see the increase in the rise in a number of the mental health issues that are confronting our students and confronting our teachers. The time is now, and I hope that I have the support of all of the stakeholders to be able to make this exercise work. It is not about asking me why, why no? I think most of you now have to be asking the question, tell me why it can't be no, because there is no better time for us to do it. Our cases are down, and I hope that those cases continue to be down. We know more about the Miss C than we did before. We know that most of the students present with asymptomatic. We also know that the number of cases are quite low in relation to our children, and we understand that our protocols is what it is that basically makes the difference between us getting sick or not getting sick. Therefore, I ask all Barbadians to work with us together over the course of the next few weeks. We have 4 weeks before we start school, and therefore we have lots of time to fine-tune and to consult and to discuss. I'm not going to be detracted by those who want to drag the Ministry of Education or myself into things that, at the end of the day, at this point in time, I don't believe the country needs. I think we need to be unified. We need to appreciate each other's concerns, but we need to work together to get our children back into school and our teachers back into the classroom environment. And therefore, I am at the end of my report to the country as to where we are, and I hope that over the course of the next few days we can have the discourse continuing with our unions and all of our various stakeholders to ensure that we fine-tune the protocols that we have, but that we work together to be able to get all stakeholders on the same page. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Minister. Well, joining us from the media, we have Colville Mounsey from the Nation newspaper, Ryan Broom from CBC, Kerry Gooden from Loop, and Emmanuel Joseph from Barbados Today. Lady and gentlemen, your questions.
I could not help hearing during your presentation mentioning hope that you have the support of the stakeholders. Could you tell us, following your most recent meetings with the union, if they are now on board with the plans to reopen school on the dates that you would have detailed? And just as a quick follow-up question, with no vaccinations for children yet at this time, and as you would have mentioned as well, the concerns as it relates to Miss C, could you tell me if any type of risk assessment was done? So for example, do you have a positivity rate among children? Do you know the number of children that would have tested positive during this period? And how you intend to mitigate the findings of that study if that was done?
Thank you so much. I'll take the first question. I cannot say that there is consensus. What I can say is that we reported to the unions yesterday morning as to the recommendations that I was taking to Cabinet. They shared with us some of their views on the recommendations that were being made, and we indicated to them that obviously over the course of the next few weeks we would continue to engage and to share with them our plans for rolling out they return to school. I don't know that there will ever be consensus on everything, but I do feel that based on my discourse with a lot of teachers, parents, and certainly all of the stakeholders, as I said before, I get a sense that there is a general feeling that we should return to school, but we need to do so safely. And that too is what the unions have presented to me. There's not a desire not to go back. It is a simple case that they want to ensure that the schools are safe. And that is what my responsibility is, to make sure that we present to them and to their base that the school environment is as safe as possible. As it relates to your second question, we have indicated to them, and I must tell you that coming out of our first meeting last week with the unions, there was concern about the amount of information that was out there, perhaps even in some cases a misinterpretation of the vaccine and of obviously MIS-C. We took the opportunity coming out of that meeting to engage with the medical profession and the teachers, and to have a forum where teachers had the opportunity to ask questions about the vaccination, the myths, any misrepresentations that may have been out there. They also had the opportunity to discuss MIS-C, and I believe many, just to reinforce what the doctors would have indicated, I think the general consensus was that it was safe to return to the school environment, and in particular once you have the vaccination, you place yourself in a better position to minimize your risk. So it was not to say that children were going to put you at greater risk of getting the COVID-19 virus, but what simply we needed to do was to protect ourselves by sanitizing, keeping the physical distancing, and ensuring obviously that we wear the mask as at all times. So it really is about minimizing risk at this point in time.
But in terms of the positivity numbers for children, do you have any of those numbers that you can share at this time?
My brief conversation with Minister Bostic this afternoon suggested that the positivity rate is minuscule. And I believe that over the course of the next few days, the Ministry of Health and Wellness will address these issues in relation to children. I am certainly not a member of the medical fraternity, but my understanding is that it is very low and therefore does not present the alarm that some are trying to create in the public domain.
Good evening, Minister Bradshaw. Ryan Broom here, CBC. Is there any indication as yet how all of this will affect the common entrance exam date?
We will not announce a common entrance examination date at this point in time. As I said before, there is too much anxiety even in normal times in relation to this examination. We need to get our children back into the classroom environment first in a face-to-face way to be able to assess where they are. When we did a survey with the common entrance, the class 4 teachers a few weeks ago, I mean, truthfully, many of them were ready to return to the classroom. We were equally surprised that the unions were presenting a position that they did not wish to go back. But we did a survey. Many of them completed the survey and sent it back to us and indicated that they would have wanted at least 4 weeks of face-to-face to be able to complete the syllabus. Now, completing the syllabus is completely different from being able to tell you whether or not a child is ready to be able to sit an examination. It can't tell you whether the child is having issues at home, if the child has had, this entire disruption of learning affected as a result of not being in the classroom environment. It doesn't tell you any of these things. And therefore, we feel that before making any harsh decision or any decision at all in relation to this examination, which we have control over, and I want to make that point, we need to assess our children. And I think once we put the children first in all of this, we can make the best decision in the interest of the education in this country at this point in time.
As we spoke about assessment, will there be random testing of staff and random testing of students before they go back in, as well as during the school year?
My understanding from the Ministry of Health and Wellness is that they are increasing the amount of testing across Barbados. I think over the last couple of days we've seen, we've seen a lower rate of cases coming to the fore, but we've also seen less testing. And I believe from yesterday, I think they started to go back up and to encourage Barbadians to come out and be tested. The unions raised these issues with me as well in relation to whether we would be testing. We are not opposed to testing. We believe that the more we test, the more we are able to identify whether there are pockets of COVID in any community. So I am certainly not opposed to it. I think it is something that we're going to have to flesh out with the Ministry of Health and Wellness further. It is something that we will have to, obviously, if we test, for instance, children, we're going to have the consent of parents. But I don't think there is any unwillingness on the part of this government to ensure that we test, random or otherwise, as many people as possible to let us know where we really are.
The Minister, Emmanuel Joseph from Barbados today. Have you factored in the vendors that will be gathering around the schools, considering that you see children bunching around the vendors? How will this play out?
We've said that the canteens will continue to operate. Obviously, we will have things, for instance, like packed lunches from the school meals. There will be specific protocols in place for the canteen operators, and that includes the vendors as well. And I want people to appreciate that there will be even greater vigilance than before in the way in which we deal with our children, both inside the school plan and outside of the school plan.
Issue of parents, what level of buy-in are you receiving from the parents on the reopening of school?
I have spoken to many parents. Again, my number is very public, and people message me in many different forums to express their concerns, sometimes to complain, to indicate challenges that they're having. And I'm always receptive to listening to all of the stakeholders, especially parents, because at the end of the day, if we don't make the educational system work for everybody, then we're going to have problems later on. With respect to how parents are feeling, I think parents are also, just like teachers, they're overwhelmed. This has not been easy for many of them. I think many of them have learned a lot by being in the online environment as they watch the teachers interface with their children, and to see how difficult it is to manage a classroom environment. I think many of them also have are overwhelmed as well, because they may have a number of children at home, and this is the first time perhaps that they're having to interact with the children in this type of way to deal with their education. So I know that it has not been easy for parents, but I think too they have a responsibility, as I said before, to make sure that this works, because they have been making the call as well that we try to find a way to get the students back into the classroom environment, and I hope that they will be supportive and certainly ensure that the students do what is right and adhere to all of the protocols.
Minister,
how about resolving the CXC issue, because we know this has having an impact on the mental health of the children?
I mean, previously? And oh, yes, and a very good question. I think, this has been difficult for all students across the board, but it has been particularly difficult for the students who have been facing examinations. I think all of us who've been through exams know how difficult you feel when you're having to prepare for an examination. Many of them, obviously, these exams will determine whether they go into university, whether they get entrance into one of the tertiary institutions, and therefore it is a very nerve-wracking time in the lives of a lot of our students. And I've engaged with these various student bodies as well, and they've shared their concerns. Many of them in relation to CXC have really placed us in a position now where we want to ensure that mental health and wellness is paramount. And so we're not taking it for granted, which is why we have extended it not just to the students doing CXC, but we've said that even in relation to all students going back into school, there has to be a committee that is working to give that necessary support to all of those students as well.
The media, we just want to remind you that we have a very short time this evening, so Colville, we can take 2 more questions. I'll give you the first one.
Okay, well, I'll just ask 2 in 1. Firstly, just at the risk of stating the obvious, the June 20th date for common entrance, that is now off the table. And my second question, given the issues that you would have pointed out with regards to the online platforms, the 100% access to those online platforms, did you do an assessment as to how far behind the syllabus are we, and how ready would students be for preparations for those major exams that, as you would have indicated, their futures hinge on?
I think I answered the question before, but I'll reiterate it again. We surveyed some of the teachers in relation to class 4 to just get a sense in relation to the examination, how they were progressing in relation to the syllabus. Many of them said that they felt that they needed additional time, and obviously that meant that they had not completed the syllabus fully, or it was difficult to complete it because obviously children may have not been online at various points in time. The reality is that we haven't done a survey of all teachers, but again, teachers have been calling and saying they would love additional time. They would love the face-to-face experience to be able to find out and to get a sense of where children are. There are teachers who will tell you that they can't tell where the children truly are unless they actually have that ability to see them in the classroom, to get a sense of where they are. They may confide in them more in the classroom environment face-to-face than they will over the internet. And these are things that we have to accept in terms of the change in the circumstances. That's why we're saying that we have to do assessments, because it is only when you bring the students back into the classroom environment that you're going to really appreciate and understand where they are at. Children can do a test online, but they may have the answers, as some do, somewhere written, stuck on a sticky tag somewhere in the bedroom or on the table. That's the reality. The only way that you can prepare them for what the examination is going to entail, which means that they have to write in front of the invigilators, is to be able to put them into the classroom environment with the past papers and to be able to test them. And that therefore requires that we bring them back in, give them the opportunity for the teachers to be able to assess, pick up any issues that or challenges that may have presented itself over the course of the last year, allow our student support services department to be able to do the necessary interventions and to be able to make some decisions in terms of, is the child ready to do the examination? Do we need more time in terms of the syllabus? Should they be deferred because they just have not grasped the fundamentals? I don't think that we're at this point anymore in this juncture of our history where we are so focused on an examination that we forget what is important. And it has to be important that the children have the basic foundations and understanding of certain concepts. To just elevate a child to another institution when the child can barely read or write or hasn't grasped the instruction for the last year is wrong. I don't think that's what Barbadians want Barbados to become. And therefore we have to take a stand and make a determination as to where our children is at, and then be able to say, okay, let us do X, let us do Y. But it's not going to be a rushed approach to do an examination until we are in a position to clearly understand what is happening with our kids. And that's for 11 plus, that is for all the children across the system. We have to know where they are first.
So we'll take one final question. Ryan?
Minister, does this restart mean that Blackman and Gollop will be taken out of circulation as an isolation center completely, or are the students going to be relocated to another location?
No, the arrangements have already been put in place for the standing down of Blackman and Gollop. Again, it is a signal that our cases are coming down, that we have a better handle on the situation, and that we understand that we have to get that institution which has served us well in this pandemic, we have to get our children back into school. We never expected on the last occasion that we would have had to stand up Blackman and Gollop again. We did a wonderful handover, and thanks to the Ministry of Health and Wellness, we got a lot of things done at the school that perhaps in normal circumstances we wouldn't have been able to do. But the fact is, our schools cannot become isolation facilities or anything indefinitely, because our children have to learn. Simple.
Thank you, Minister. Do you have any closing comments?
Just to go back to the question of whether there will be consensus on these matters from unions and other stakeholders, this is not about getting consensus. This is about simply stating the obvious. And I think most people deep down understand that our children have lost significant time, that we have, as a country, been able to put protocols in place to ensure that we do things safely. Barbados has a standard of protocols that is second to none, and it is basically due to the hard work of the social partnership, all of the private sector entities, making sure that from barbershops to salons, to hotels, to restaurants, that we have a set of protocols by which people can be guided so that we can get back to work. Schools are no different, and therefore I believe strongly that once we are able to work together to understand what those protocols are, why we are doing this, and to bear in mind that there is, it's about balancing risk and minimizing risk, we can get our children back to school for term 3 or at any point in time when we need to, once we make sure that we do so safely.
Thank you very much, Minister. That is Minister of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Honourable Santia Bradshaw. We were also joined by the Acting Chief Education Officer, Ms. Joy Adamson, the Deputy Chief Education Officer, Dr. Roderick Rudder, members of the media, and thank you for joining us. Good evening.